Okay, we are back. We are on chapter 9, and where we left off was that Edward has been found by Lawrence, who was a fisherman. He found him out by sea, and it seems as though Edward was brought up off of the seafloor by what seemed to be a hurricane. And he brought him home to his wife, Nellie, and she is so excited. She's can't wait to dress him up and to take care of him. And here's a picture of what they look like again, in case you forgot. The only thing was that Nellie has decided that Edward is a girl and has renamed him Susanna. Okay, so let's look at chapter 9. Here's a funny picture to start with. There's Edward in a dress. All right. And so Edward Tulane became Susanna. Nellie sewed several outfits for him. A pink dress with ruffles for special occasions, a simple shift fashioned out of a flower-covered cloth for everyday use, and a long white gown made of cotton for Edward to sleep in. In addition, she remade his ears, stripping them of a few pieces of fur that remained designing him a new pair. "Oh," she told him when she was done, "you look lovely." He was horrified at first. He was, after all, a boy rabbit. He did not want to be dressed as a girl, and the outfits, even the special occasion dress, were so simple, so plain. They lacked the elegance and artistry of his real clothes. But then Edward remembered lying on the ocean floor, the muck in his face, the stars so far away, and he said to himself, "What difference does it really make? Wearing a dress won't hurt me." Besides, life in a little greenhouse with a fisherman and his wife was sweet. Nellie loved to bake, and so she spent her day in the kitchen. She put Edward on the counter and leaned him up against the flour canister and arranged his dress around his knees. She bent his ears so that he could hear well, and then she set to work, kneading dough for the bread and rolling out dough for cookies and pies. Soon the kitchen was filled with the smells of baking bread and the sweet smells of cinnamon and sugar and cloves. The windows steamed up, and while Nellie worked, she talked. Now let's think about this before. When Edward was at home with Abilene and the adults and Pellegrina, think about, did he listen when they were talking? If I remember correctly, he ignored them. He didn't want anything to do with their conversations, and he kind of felt them annoying. So let's see if he's changed at all after he's been on the floor of the ocean for so long. She told Edward about her children, her daughter Lolly, who was a secretary, and her boys, Ralph, who was in the army, and Raymond, who had died of pneumonia when he was only 5 years old. "He drowned inside of himself," said Nellie. "It is a horrible, terrible thing, the worst thing to watch somebody you love die right in front of you and not be able to do anything about it. I dream about him most nights." Nellie wiped at her tears with the back of her hands. She smiled at Edward. "I suppose you think I'm daft, talking to a toy, but it seems to me that you're listening, Susanna." And Edward was surprised to discover that he was listening. Before, when Abilene talked to him, everything had seemed so boring, so pointless. But now, the stories Nellie told struck him as the most important thing in the world, and he listened as if his life depended on it, on what she said. It made him wonder if some of the muck from the ocean floor had gotten inside his china head and damaged him somehow. In the evening, Lawrence came home from the sea, and there was dinner, and Edward sat at the table with the fisherman and his wife. He sat in an old wooden high chair, and while at first he was mortified, a high chair, after all, was a chair designed for babies, not elegant rabbits, he soon became used to it. He liked being up high, looking out over the table instead of staring at the tablecloth as he had at the Tulane household. He liked feeling a part of things. Every night after dinner, Lawrence said he thought he would go out and get some fresh air, and that maybe Susanna would like to come with him. He placed Edward on his shoulder as he had the first night when he walked down through town, bringing him home to Nellie. They went outside, and Lawrence lit his pipe and held Edward there on his shoulder. And if the night was clear, Lawrence said the names of the constellations one at a time. Andromeda, Pegasus, pointing at them with the stem of his pipe. Edward loved looking up at the stars, and he loved the sounds of the constellation names. They were sweet in his ears. Sometimes, though, staring up at the night sky, Edward remembered Pellegrina, saw again her dark and glowing eyes, and a chill would go right through him. Warthogs, he thought. Witches. But Nellie, before she put him to bed each night, sang Edward a lullaby, a song about a mockingbird that did not sing, and a diamond ring that would not shine, and the sound of Nellie's voice soothed the rabbit, and he forgot about Pellegrina. Life, for a very long time, was sweet. And then Lawrence and Nellie's daughter came for a visit. And that's the end of chapter 9. Okay, next chapter is chapter 10. And that's the height chair. Lolly was a lumpy woman who spoke too loudly and wore too much lipstick. She entered the house and immediately spotted Edward sitting on the living room couch. "What's this?" she said. She put down her suitcase and picked Edward up by one foot. She held him upside down. "That's Susanna," said Nellie. "Susanna!" shouted Lolly. She gave Edward a shake. His dress was up over his head and he could see nothing. Already he formed a deep and abiding hatred for Lolly. "Your father found her," said Nellie. "She came up in a net and she didn't have no clothes on, so I made her some dresses." "Have you gone skivvy?" shouted Lolly. "Rabbits don't need clothes." "Well," said Nellie. Her voice shook. "This one seemed to." Lolly tossed Edward back on the couch. He landed face down with his arms over his head and his dress still over his face, and he stayed that way through dinner. "Why have you got out that old height chair?" shouted Lolly. "Oh, don't pay no mind to it," said Nellie. "Your father was just gluing on a missing piece, wasn't you, Lawrence?" "That's right," said Lawrence without looking up from his plate. Of course, after dinner, Edward did not go outside and stand beneath the stars to have a smoke with Lawrence, and Nellie, for the first time since Edward had been with her, did not sing him a lullaby. In fact, Edward was ignored and forgotten about until the next morning, when Lolly picked him up again and pulled his dress doll down away from him and stared him in the eye. "Got the old folks bewitched, don't ya?" she said. "I heard the talk of the town that they've been treating you like a rabbit child." Edward stared back at Lolly. Her lipstick was a bright and bloody red. He felt a cold breeze blow through the room. Was the door open? "Well, you don't fool me," she said. She gave him a shake. "We'll be taking a trip together, you and me." Holding Edward by the ears, Lolly marched into the kitchen and shoved him face down in the garbage can. "Ma," Lolly shouted, "I'm taking the truck. I'm going to head on out and do some errands." "Oh," came Nellie's tremulous voice. "That's wonderful, dear. Goodbye, then." "Goodbye," thought Edward, as Lolly hauled the garbage can out to the truck. "Goodbye," Nellie called again, louder this time. Edward felt a sharp pain somewhere deep inside his china chest. For the first time, his heart called out to him. It said two words: Nellie, Lawrence. So in this chapter, to review, Nellie and Lawrence's daughter, Lolly, came, and she said she's heard about how her parents are treating this rabbit like a child, and she thinks it's ridiculous. So what she did was she took him and put him in the trash, and now she's getting rid of the trash. Okay, chapter 11. It's like this. Edward ended up at the dump. He lay on top of orange peels, coffee grounds, rancid bacon, and rubber tires. The first night, he was on top of the garbage heap, and so he was able to look up at the stars and find comfort in their light. In the morning, a short man came climbing through the trash and rubble. He stopped when he was standing on the top of the highest mountain. He put his hands under his armpits and flapped his elbows. The man crowed loudly. He shouted, "Who am I? I'm Ernest. Ernest, who is the king of the world. How can I be the king of the world? Because I am king of garbages, and garbages is what the world is made of. Ha, ha, ha. Therefore, I am Ernest. Ernest, who is king of the world," he crowed again. Edward was inclined to agree with Ernest's assessment of the world being made of garbage, especially after his second day at the dump, when a load of trash was deposited directly on top of him. He lay there, buried alive. He could not see the sky. He could not see the stars. He could see nothing. What kept Edward going, what gave him hope, was thinking of how he would find Lolly and exact his revenge. He would pick her up by her ears. He would bury her under a mountain of trash. But after almost 40 days and nights had passed, the weight and the smell of the garbage above and below him clouded Edward's thoughts, and soon he gave up thinking about revenge and gave in to despair. It was worse, much worse than being buried at sea. It was worse because Edward was a different rabbit now. He couldn't say how he was different. He just knew that he was. He remembered again Pellegrina's story about the princess who loved nobody. The witch turned her into a warthog because she loved nobody. He understood that now. He heard Pellegrina say, "You disappoint me." "Why?" he asked her. "Why do I disappoint you?" But he knew the answer to that question, too. It was because he had not loved Abilene enough, and now she was gone from him, and he would never be able to make it right. And Nellie and Lawrence were gone, too. He missed them terribly. He wanted to be with them. The rabbit wondered if that was love. Day after day passed, and Edward was aware of time passing only because every morning he could hear Ernest performing his dawn ritual, cackling and crowing about being king of the world. On his 180th day at the dump, salvation arrived for Edward in the most unusual form. The garbage around him shifted, and the rabbit heard the sniffing and panting of a dog. Then came the frenzied sound of digging. The garbage shifted again, and suddenly, miraculously, the beautiful buttery light of late afternoon shone on Edward's face. Here's a little sneak peek of chapter 12. When I see that picture, I think for a minute about that dog Rosie that was at the beginning, because Edward did not like that dog. So I'm wondering to myself how it's going to work out with this dog. All right, we'll start with chapter 12 next time. See you later.